Derrière vous, il suscite des débats passionnés depuis son adoption en 19...
Before we went to the break, Rashmi spoke about the importance of leveraging the linkages and positive economic spillovers from investments in digital data collection, processing, and analysis. This may require us to think somewhat beyond just the areas in digital value chains that are easiest to enter.
I think it is a very extremely important question, and it is being faced by many developing countries, including South Africa. What should be the policy with respect to your data? Now, data sovereignty is very important because that gives you an ownership of your data, Because tomorrow, suppose you do not have data sovereignty, even if you have data localization, that is not going to help you, because the digital platforms can store the data in your country because of data localization, but they can take the data outside. Now, you cannot ask them not to do it because you do not own the data. So the first step is to have data sovereignty and own your data. Now, the second step is, where do you want to store the data? That is data localization. Do you want to store it in your country or you want to store it outside? Now, the confusion in the minds of policymakers, in many of the countries is that, let's say, okay, I have data sovereignty, I own my data, but I can store my data in any cloud because I regulate my data. And I can do whatever I want to do with my data.
Data storage on digital cloud platforms owned by foreign companies might not always translate to African countries owning the data generated by the digital activities of their citizens. That's part of the story. But the other question mark is, who then processes the data?
But the problem over here is that you have access to your data, but that access is only partial access. Full access to your data is with the country where the data is stored. Because let's say you store your data in US clouds. Now, when you want to access data, you have to go through US regulations around their data, which is stored in their national territory. So you have a partial access, while US can process your data and it can access your data directly. Now, the question over here is, even if, let's say, you have equal access to the data, who has more processing capacity? Now, US has a much better capacity to process your data than you have. So even if you own your data and you say, okay, I'll store my data in US clouds, but I will regulate my data. But the question is that once the processing of the data starts, even if you have access, you do not have the processing capacity. So what do you do with access to data? And how will you build your processing capacity? When the manufacturing, industrial revolution happened and manufacturing came, you developed your manufacturing skills only when you had factories of your own and only when you learned how to manufacture the products. Similarly, you have to learn how to process data, and that can be done only through, if you do it on your own, it will take you so many years, and the first mover advantage that comes in the digital economy will never let you catch up. So you have to develop and process your data immediately. So that processing capacity has to be developed, and that can be developed through policies around your data. Just to give you an example, Indonesia has a data localization policy. It has data sovereignty. Now, what is happening is big digital platforms like Google, Amazon, they are taking out their data from Singapore and they are taking it to Indonesia for processing their data. Now, because of that, Indonesia not only gets FDI in its data centers, it also gets, it also learns processing of data. So it is very important for governments to, at this point of time, to have the policies in place to encourage digital technology transfers, to encourage joint ventures, to encourage more domestic linkages of digital platforms, so that the domestic industry, the national industry also learns how to process data, how to use the digital technologies. I think it is much more than that, because that is what I said. A learning from China is that you have to have a comprehensive and an integrated policy across all sectors. The Chinese experience tells us is that you have to have a national policy, you have to have a sectoral policy, and then you have to go down to the people and have to have a policy to develop the digital using skills of the people, so that a demand for these products is created. So at every stage you need to transform your policies so that you increase digital content in the production and you create demand for the digital products and services. So similarly over here, data, this is just one step to have data centers. If you look at the US, in US, there is so much of competition among the states in US to attract data centers, investment in data centers. So you have data center incentives like free electricity, no rent. So they want data centers to be in their own states, because that will create domestic linkages. So similarly for South Africa, it is very important to have first data sovereignty, second data localization, but then it is important to have, to encourage domestic linkages of digital platforms with national industries. So the way we had policy around FDI to increase domestic linkages, let's say for mining, it is the same thing. You had foreign firms coming for mining, but then you also made sure that there is a domestic content that has to be used by these. There has to be some other linkages. There has to be joint ventures. There has to be some technology transfers. Similarly for this, in the digital economy, you have to have similar policies. You have to see how you develop the processing skills of your own domestic firms. So joint ventures could be a very good, policy to follow with respect to data centers. And then what China did was, for its SMEs, China, had big data analytics and data intelligence done by big firms, which then it shared with SMEs free of cost. So for South Africa, this is what the government or the public sector can do. Have big data analytics done in joint ventures with foreign platforms or foreign firms or big tech firms, and then distribute the data intelligence sector-wise to their SMEs free of cost.
Digital advances are not only an enabler, but as Rashmi suggested, are becoming a critical feature of the export basket of many emerging economies, and also an intrinsic feature of how national industry can transition to higher value-added activities in the global matrix of production. The digital is not only confined to the web, it seems.
I think it is very important that we think beyond call centers and beyond, in the value chain. We need to now upgrade and think beyond just the lowest end of the value chain when it comes to business, global business service, processing services, because given the capacity, given the size of the population, especially the young population in Africa, what really needs to be done is to become, a net exporter of Africa has the potential of becoming a net exporter of digital services. And when I say digital services, it cuts across all sectors. So now if you look at mode 1 services, exports, it includes your architectural exports, it includes your medical, financial services, it includes all kinds of services through mode 1. So there is a new data set which has come out in WTO, which is called TISMOS, which is trade in service mode-wise services. So when we look at that data and when we analyze, we find that almost all African countries are net importers of digital services via mode 1. Now, given the size of the young population, given the advantages that Africa has, especially with respect to language, what really needs to be done is that in all services sectors, there is a need to build the capacity in terms of upgrading in the value chains of the business services, and not just provide call center services or these kind of low-end services, but graduate to more value-added services, which can be looking at your architectural services, looking at your designing services, looking at, there are so many services, travel and tourism services, which are exported through mode one. So I think this mindset also needs to be changed, and Africa should also start looking at what are those services, identifying those services where through mode one it can boost its exports. So not just the call centers, but going beyond that into the other sectors like designing services, like financial services, many other services which can be now exported from Africa, and language is a big advantage for Africa.
Rashmi suggests various ways that African economies can advance their digital technologies, namely through investing in industrial upgrading and learning to produce more value-added services, from call centers through to network architectural services and other more sophisticated elements of the digital value chain. This might go some way in dealing with the digital trade imbalances between the continent of Africa and the rest of the world. There's also the potential in the digital economy to create domestic employment and data processing capability in many African economies.
Yes, I think this is very important because what is happening is, when I say digital solutions, this is what I really mean is that there can be so many new streams of employment that can be generated in the digital economy, which can help in boosting exports of digital services. Now, just to give you an example, that because of the new technologies which are coming in the production of, in the manufacturing sphere, like the 3D printing, they will need customized, this is mass customized production. So they will need data on the consumers. They will need, what designs the consumers like. Now, in Africa, only Africans know their taste and preferences much more than any other continent or any other producer from any other country. So this is an area which has a lot of potential, and Africa has a comparative advantage. That is to start, have digital designing. This can cut across leather sector, textile and clothing sector. This can cut across, so many sectors where designing is needed. So this could be a new stream of employment for the youth of Africa to start designing, and then encourage the 3D printing. But let's say now I'll show you how it is integrated with your data policy. Let's say Africa does not have a data policy. Then tomorrow this data will be taken out, and when the 3D printing becomes mainstream, that data will be used to customize production, and then the same, the same products like clothing will be sold back to Africa, catering to their tastes and preferences. Because with the data intelligence, the producers will know, the exporters will know what the Africans like. But if Africa owns the data and the first mover advantage goes to the African designers, they will know how to customize the production and feed into the 3D printing, which is done in Africa within the manufacturing sector of Africa, and then they can cater to African continent. You don't need to really import these products tomorrow. If today you have the right data policy, you have developed the skills and capacities of your designers to use computer aided designs, and to customize production. So just to give you an example, this is a new area in the digital economy which can be exploited and explored to increase the exports of digital services by Africa. So tomorrow, when foreign firms or e-commerce platforms want to come into your country and sell, the clothing, they will need data from you. They will need your designs. They will need your 3D printing, and then that will create demand for your own products.
The question then is, how do we pursue such a policy agenda to enable such investment and employment? It does seem, though, that some of the answers might come from the experiences of India.
If you look at India, what is happening in India is, you talked about the example in Bangalore. There is a lot of applications this is a new stream of employment which has come up in India, which is application developers. So they design applications and they design digital solutions. I'll give you an example. There was a very young student who developed an app, which developed a sensor so that when you exit the farm, when you exit the shop, you have to just show your shopping bag next to the sensor, and your money is deducted directly from your account. Now we know that this has been picked up by Amazon, right? And we also know that a lot of big platforms are using this app, but this was developed by a very young person who sold his innovation. So this, what we are doing with our digital startups is we are giving them money. They are using their own money. They develop an innovation, and when the digital solution becomes successful, they sell it to big platforms like Microsoft, Amazon. But then the country loses that innovation. So it is very important that even with respect to digital startups, we can have so many new streams of employment generated for our young population just by providing the skills to develop applications, to develop digital solutions. And digital solutions can be of many forms, not just applications, but also like, an SME goes to a digital startups and says that I am, let's say I produce leather, but I don't know how to digitalize my production. Now, this is a digital solution going through the stages of production and seeing that which exactly stage can be overcome through digital technology, so that the value chain is shortened and the processing time is quicker. So I think these are the kind of innovations and these are the kind of policies which need to be put in place. So digital innovation policy becomes a very important component of digital industrial policy, along with your e-commerce policy and data policy. So these are all integrated.
I guess we have to look at the cross-border flow of goods and capital via globalization and ask ourselves, how do we do things a bit differently? How do we avoid the race to the bottom and the reproduction of an extractive and unjust global system?
It is very important to now not look at globalization as free trade policies. What we need is a strategic globalization. So what hyperglobalization has taught us is that hyperglobalization is going to lead to concentration of rents in the hands of very few. What we really need to concentrate is now on employment, increasing equity, having inclusive, sustainable development. And for that, it becomes very important to have policies which really concentrates on, like you said, decent work, generating employment, looking at all levels of skilled people, and then having very targeted policies so that the share of labor, total labor, increases. What is happening is we see the share of profits rising and the share of labor going down. So we need to reverse that. We need to increase the share of labor and we need to tax the profit so that we have more equitable and we have a more just economy in place. And I think after COVID, it becomes even more important to have the social safety nets in place. And digital economy gives us that opportunity, to now use the digital technologies and digital skills and capacities to generate new type of employments where everyone has, whatever your level of skill is, you have the opportunity to work and to have to increase your share in total income. I think that is very important to rethink the policies that have been put in place. And so many times I have been asked this question that should the digital industrial policy now replace the industrial policy? And I keep saying that digital industrial policy is a subset of industrial policy. So whatever industrial policy we have, the objective, which I think somehow we have forgotten earlier, the policymakers were very clear that industrial policy's objective is to increase production and create more employment. somehow now, because of this narrative around global value chain, the objective has shifted to linking into global value chains and increasing your exports. But that is not helping. We have seen that by increasing exports, what is happening is that domestic value added content in exports is declining. So you're linking into global value chains, but you're delinking from your domestic value chains. As a result, employment, instead of creating more employment, you're creating more exports, less output and less employment, because your imported content is so high. So it's now important to rethink the industrial policy, bring the focus back to generating employment and output, increasing the share of labor in total output, and that can be, and how to use digital technologies, digital skills, digital capacities to do that in all three stages of production. And when you say three stages of production, we also have to look at it in a vertical manner at the national level, sector level, and then micro level. So pre-production stage, what should be the national policy, sectoral policy, and micro policy, which caters to SMEs. So in the production stage, what could be the national policy, sectoral policy, and micro level policy. So this is what is needed. You have to have a matrix which integrates all policies together into a comprehensive national policy, where industrial policy is a subset of the national policy and digital industrial policy becomes a subset of the industrial policy. So that is the kind of framework that is needed.
Scope is there for digital compacts or cooperation on digital policy issues, especially now in the context of the integration of trade markets and trade routes on the continent via the AFCFTA?
I think, I have been saying this for some time now, that cooperation is better than negotiation, especially when you come to the Africa Continental FTA and digital economy. It is very important to have a digital cooperation framework rather than digital negotiations. Because once you get into negotiations, the same issues and the same problems will arise as they are now in the WTO. Because it is just the big countries and the small countries, the issues remain the same. So in our UNCTAD publication on rising product digitalization implications for the South, we have proposed a regional digital cooperation agenda. Now, this is a 10-point agenda, which is a very progressive agenda, which can be picked up by the regional communities and like, COMESA, or it can be picked up at the regional community level, and then it can be elevated to the continental level. And this agenda really looks at how small countries, African countries, can get support from the region in terms of their digital transformation. Just to give you an example, it is very important. One of the issues in the digital cooperation agenda, or one of the proposed point, is that a data economy needs to be created, and this can start at the region, at the sub-regional level, and then it can escalate to the regional level. So at the sub-regional level, let's say COMESA, there are small African countries. So there can be a pooling of data of all COMESA countries together, and a digital infrastructure can be set up for that region. So there could be regional data centers set up. There could be regional e-commerce platforms that can be set up, and the whole region should be able to access that digital infrastructure for their own industrial production. And that way, small African countries will also gain, as well as the big African countries within that region are going to gain. It is going to be a win-win situation. And instead of really negotiating, this kind of cooperation can help all the African countries. And then at the continent level, once this is successful at the sub-regional level, then at the regional level, similar pooling in of data and, pooling in of financial resources, so that a digital infrastructure can be set up for the continent as a whole.
What then is the role of money in such a framework? How do we finance all of the things we need to mitigate the hazards of digital technological advances?
Every time we think of policies, we think of how do we finance that policy, right? But what we really need to do is digital economy is giving us the opportunity of generating new sources of revenue for the government, and that is taxing the digital platforms, which we are not doing. And also, now because of more transparency, curbing the illicit flow of funds. Again, we have always been looking at attracting foreign investment, but we have never seen how much of money goes out because of foreign investments, because of the foreign firms, remittance of profits. How much is that happening? Are we having net gains or because of FDI? Now, coming to the issue of, there is, again, like I said, policy space is very important. In WTO, we have moratorium on custom duties on electronic transmissions. That means whatever is electronically imported, we do not put custom duties on it. So in one of my research papers, I have estimated how much money can be generated by the governments. I've done it country-wise, continent-wise, and region-wise. And what we find is that developing countries, if this moratorium is removed, that means right now governments are banned in terms of putting custom duties on electronic imports. Now, if this ban is removed, $10 billion can be generated in 1 year by developing countries on only 46 products which are electronically imported. And these 49 products, and these are across, and these are luxury items like movies, video games, music, printed ebooks, printed material like ebooks, and software. Now, software, if you want to bring software duty free, you can bring it. You can unilaterally put your duties to zero. But why are we allowing video games to be imported without putting any custom duties on it? Why are we allowing movies and music, at this time of COVID, when we need financial resources? Why are we not regulating the imports of electronic transmissions, which are really luxury items? So there are new opportunities to generate revenue. So the governments need to remove this moratorium in the WTO. South Africa and India have put a proposal for removal of this moratorium. And I think it's very important to push for the removal so that the governments can generate a new source of revenue to fund its digital policies.
These issues, as we are reminded, are about the global digital economy and how policy plays an important role in determining who has the power to participate in certain markets and who doesn't. The importance of industrial policy is key to the progress of countries on the continent insofar as the digital economy is concerned. And we've explored the relationship between these, both on the shop floor in an industrial sense, but also in the allocative decision of financial and capital markets. We've also considered how imbalanced some of this trade is and how that in many ways is an outcome of market structural relationships as well. We hope this episode has shone a light on how developments in the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the digitization of the global economy can be navigated by many African policymakers. Make sure to catch our next episode of the Aporde podcast. From me, Ayabonga Cawe. Till next time, take care.
Derrière vous, il suscite des débats passionnés depuis son adoption en 19...